Hello everybody and welcome again to today's webinar, which is presented by Melcher and is on security in the database is more than just granting access. But as I mentioned, the main presenter today is Melcher. Probably already heard of her. She has done a webinar for us before on Oracle database security. She's the Oracle ACE Director. She's on the Oracle Security Customer Advisor board for the IOUG. She's also a member of the IOUG board. And if you go to some of the many Oracle conferences, you've probably been to a presentation that Michelle's hosted before as well. I'm James Mercer. I'm the creator and editor of allthingsoracle.com, and I'm the Oracle Tools Product Marketing Manager at Redgate Software. So a couple of things before we start. Everybody will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. If at any time you can't hear us, please use the chat box or the questions box within the control panel, but it may be just down to your speaker and your GoToWebinar audio settings. Please check these first. There will be a full Q&A session with Michelle at the end of the presentation. But at any time, if you come across things that you'd like a little bit of clarification on, or just things that come to you as the webinar progresses, please type these in the control panel in advance of the Q&A session. And there will be a full recording of this webinar. I'll send you an email, but you'll be able to find it on the Redgate website within the section that you found out about this particular webinar. Okay, looking at today's agenda, I'm going to do a quick introduction to Redgate software in case you haven't come across us or heard about us before. I'm then going to hand over to Michelle, who's going to go over the main part of this presentation. Before the Q&A, there'll be some contact details for Michelle and myself at the end. Okay, so hopefully quite a few of you have heard about Redgate before, particularly those that have come to these webinars on a regular basis. If you haven't, we were founded in 1999. We're based in Cambridge in the UK. There's about 250 of us. And one of the things that is great about working for Redgate is we're a collaborative team of people. We produce tooling and software for lots of different technologies, but we all work together within a really nice open-planned office. There's no hierarchy. All of the managers and CEOs and developers and everybody works together. As you can imagine, we follow agile development principles in the creation of our software and tooling, but because we all work together, this kind of thinking tends to go across all of the disciplines at Redgate. So for myself, working in a marketing role, I also use agile principles for developing my campaigns and running things. Redgate as a company is extremely passionate about learning, and we place a strong emphasis on education and support. And in fact, we produce lots of different resources and things like this webinar program and websites are based around all of the technologies that we produce tooling for, because not only do we want to support you guys working with our tools and working within jobs based around involved with the technologies that we produce tooling for, but of course as a company we can also learn from these type of activities ourselves, and we can really understand all of the problems that you're coming across in your daily work, and hopefully the next versions of the tools also help you with that. So some of the things that I'm doing, obviously this webinar program, but things like allthingsoracle.com, and giving away free ebooks. So you may have already downloaded Pure SQL Development, which is the ebook I gave away before Christmas. The ebook I'm currently giving away is the Oracle Essentials 4th edition, which has been updated for 11G, and it's an O'Reilly publication. So some really nice quality resources. Now, all of this thinking, this kind of learning and working together, one thing that it does for us, as I said before, enabling feedback to actually develop our tools. But our tooling really is seen as the gold standard in SQL Server database development and administration, and it's through this interaction with the community, supporting the community and learning from the community that we produce such high quality tools. And as you can imagine, the deployment suite for Oracle, which is based on the SQL Server tools, is growing rapidly. Okay, so that was a little bit about Redgate software. I hope you had a chance to check us out after the presentation. I'm going to now pass over to Michelle for the main presentation. So please bear with us if there's a little bit of a delay as I hand the screen over.
Well, as we're getting switched over, thanks, James, for the introduction and for having me be a part of this webinar. And thank you all for spending an hour with us on your extra day this year. Let me just set this up and run the slide, and hopefully everyone can see this now. So basically, I wanted to get started right in on the security topic so we have time for question and answers, because I can basically talk all day on security if you wanted me to, but we have limited time today to do this. But I have a short agenda for us, and really I want to touch a little bit on some of the concerns in the security area that we have, especially being responsible for databases and those types of environments. I want to talk about some of the database security 11G features, because I think there's been a lot of new things in 11G that are very helpful and need to be able to understand the options that we have since we're responsible for different areas. The transparent data encryption we're going to talk about a little bit, auditing, as well as some of the patching and using the last CPU that just came out in January to take a look at some of those practices that are best practices and what you would really look for when you're doing patching and setting up some of the policies. So security, why worry about it? The IAG actually does a security survey every year, and back in October 2011, this was a result of the survey saying 2/3 of companies either expect a security incident or some sort of data breach to deal with in the next 12 months. If you're responsible for super secure area of the database or private information, this is definitely a scary statistic, and database administrators as well as security administrators should really be looking hard at their environments to see what areas need to be improved upon or what different services can be offered up, and making sure some of that responsibility is communicated back to the company, even some of the risk that's involved with that. It's definitely a very challenging area of security to make sure you have the right level, if it's maintainable, and all those risks are understood. The other thing to obviously think about is our data set is not decreasing. I know my databases that I manage are not getting smaller each year, and then we're adding more and more sensitive data as we start increasing the data loads and the different sets of data that we're managing. And with that, you have the risk of obviously more sensitive data being exposed. Again, from the IAG survey, what was interesting is only about 22% encrypt backups or exports. And with transparent data encryption, we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then the DBA access to sensitive data. So even if you're not afraid of external sources, there might be some internal sources that you have your sysadmins, your DBAs that have access to the sensitive data. And 76% don't even have preventative controls on privileged users. So the trust but verify type of comment comes to mind immediately with this. And then you also have 43% with direct database access right to the database outside of applications. So even if you are looking at the application perspective of this, and looking at and verifying the roles there, you may have another half of the company, or just under half of the company, being able to access the databases directly. And so what are we doing for protecting that sensitive data and those areas of the database? So it's really not just application access. It's really not the requests that we get on a daily basis that say, hey, can I get access to this table or access to this database or access to this application? But it's really looking at the environment as a whole and understanding where the risks are, who can get access to the database, making sure those risks are communicated, and then looking at some of the options that you have to locking and securing those risks down. Also understanding that, you know, probably the 2/3 of the companies that are expecting the data breach or some type of worry there probably don't understand completely all of the controls that you could have around the database. And so some of that is educating either security admins or other managers or CIOs to understand what type of options you have available. And again, it's also data at rest, because this is key for any of those sysadmins that have access to servers, any other users that may have access to servers. Even though you would like to think that the DBAs are the only ones that have access to Oracle on that box and are able to see it, there might be others that have some sort of application running, especially in different areas where you're starting to share resources that might be available. You really also need to look at data at rest. And then you also have the internal users, so your admins and anyone who has direct access. So hopefully at this point you're not too worried, but you realize that there's some areas that you definitely need to look at and consider when you're looking at database security. And it's really not just when you get it right, have someone say, okay, I need to create a user in the database. I kind of look at security, database security, from a couple of perspectives. One, you have the database administrators who may be actually validating the roles, double-checking and maintaining some of those secure configurations, and also implementing some of the security options. You also have the security admins that may be creating in either some sort of Active Directory or LDAP type solution and actually creating those users and granting the roles that they have. And you may also have some sort of HR policies attached to that with employee change management. Obviously, these things all have to work together for the monitoring of it to make sure that the secure configuration stays as planned, that the roles follow all the way through down to the database access as needed. And then you still have some of those joint areas with classification of data and understanding what really needs to be secured. And also that maintaining of the secured configuration with communication of what has changed, as in either roles or rights or different security options that need to be implemented, or even new auditing reports that might be needed for some sort of compliance. If you're looking at database security, I start to look at it as there is definitely a security set of policies and procedures, whether it be this group creates a user, this group grants the roles, or if it's a smaller company, obviously there might be one person doing a lot of these things on their own. But there is still a set of policies of how that user gets created. So you may have a user that can only have read access, and then you're granting the roles accordingly. Or you may only have application users that can execute certain things. There's always this wonderful thought of having a perfect world where no one knows the schema password or the application password, and you can have different people running executables off of it or selecting off of it. And as much as some of that likes to be set up as your policies and procedures, even in practical uses, there might be different ways of handling that security, and there may be one or two of those users that actually get more rights than they actually need. This is also then part of another procedure, possibly, to audit that user, validate those rights, and make sure that they're only accessing the places that they're supposed to be accessing. So then the user access to applications is probably done by a different team or handled by a security team. It may not fall under the database role, but those access underneath the databases and seeing those users, because even if someone's coming, even if an application is logging in just as an application user, there are still ways to audit the access outside of the application, as well as audit the access of that user either through a machine name, an OS user type name that comes in when they log in through that user. Also, the administrative privileges have to be looked at. Personally, in doing a regular database administration job, I don't really want to know what the sensitive data is. I almost want to protect myself from knowing what is out there in data and information, and with different tools that there's different options to the database with the database vault that actually restrict those database administrators of getting into and looking at that sensitive data. Those are definitely options to look at. Also, I've always created an ID with less privileges as SysDBA or as DBA, so when I'm going and checking on certain jobs where I can actually select some of the catalog and monitor some of the jobs that are running, but not having full rights to actually read all the data in the database, I'm able to do my day-to-day job without stumbling across data that I don't even really want to see. And then I can turn on auditing for those special administration privileges to look at what I'm doing and validate with that. Those types of things are good for auditing for compliance reasons. If anyone has any even PCI, HIPAA, or in the U.S. definitely with SOX compliance, that you have those rules and regulations. And if there's a switch that you can turn on to grant roles, and I think I talked a little bit about that in the last webcast that I gave about system privileges and being able to turn those on to audit those specifically. The other thing that also has to be understood is external access and internal access. We already talked a lot about the database, access to the database outside of applications that may be internally, but external access and how the database is either protected through firewalls or how it is exposed to the different web applications that are out there. Encryption is also very big and valuable for protecting data at rest, and even impossible as you're exporting it and moving it around to different systems, that you're protecting some of your production data in test environments. Because how many of us have actually taken a full dump of production and thrown it into a test environment where now the privileges and access are completely different, and you have all your developers taking a look at that. So those are obviously the areas of concern and things to think about. And now as we're going to drill into some of the areas and talk about some of the features of the database, and especially with 11G, the security features, we'll look at how we apply some of that to what some of our risks and concerns are. So the first one is passwords and defaults. With 11G, there is a password check to check default passwords, which is basically system and manager. I don't know how many times when I either go as been a consultant and gone into a new shop and try to get into the database, just type in system and manager and see if I'm in. Or even if you're switching jobs, and if that's something, the first thing you go to check for security to make sure you know and understand what they're trying to do. I'd be really concerned about some of the security holes if you were able to do that right away. But with the 11G, Oracle actually provides a table view, a data dictionary table view, DBA users with the def passwords, so you can real quickly and easily see which users have those default passwords and get those changed right away. The other thing is with case-sensitive passwords, that you can actually set that on, or it's set on when you do database configuration assistant by default. You have that SEC case-sensitive logon parameter set to true. If you want to go back to the old way of doing it, you can always turn that off, and that's the example that we have there. Also, the strong passwords are an option now by default, and especially for the system users, for SysDBA, SysOper, and those types of users. You definitely want to start implementing strong passwords and changing those over a period of time. The default profile has changed to for the password as well as the failed attempts by default, and it has that password verify function to make sure that you're using some of the 11G functionality with the case sensitivity and not hitting some of the, and with the stronger passwords. These were things that I used to do in older versions and set up my own scripts and everything and functions to check for these. And so with 11G, it makes it a lot nicer to implement and use the Oracle provided functions and also tables to do those checks. If you're using if you're logging in with 11G and you're using a database creation assistant, it's going to ask for different passwords for all the admin accounts, so all the SysDBA system accounts. It will also give you a warning. It'll let you bypass this, but I definitely suggest, even if you want the system and sys passwords to be the same, that you definitely start to use the strong passwords and expire those. It also tells you about the configuration manager, which is very useful when you're dealing with security patches, and definitely very useful when you're dealing with very large database environments. Having tools to manage those larger environments regarding patching and what has been patched, and knowing and being alerted to when the patch that's come out and are available is very useful with the configuration manager. Real quickly on the roles that have changed. So with 11G, you now have the ASM role, which is used to stop and start the ASM instances. This is very good if you have a shop that has separation of duties, that you can actually separate specific databases that may have share the same ASM instance on a server, but those DBAs may have different roles and only be responsible for certain databases on that server. You can actually separate out the ASM role to be the one that can stop and start those services, and then the SysDBA on each individual database to have permissions there. Also with that, you now have SSL and Kerberos to authenticate the SysDBA and SysOpper users, which is helping to lock that down more as well. Web services, if you played with XMLDB, some of the XDB Web Services now are more locked down by default. You also have access control lists, ACLs, to define different web services that are being provided and who has rights to those, and you can set up policies and procedures on that. And then the directory name, base name lookups with OID authentication using wallets, and Active Directory name lookups. Some of the packages and procedures that I used to go and remove access to public are actually listed under this fine-grained access control and network services, and those were ones that would normally be flagged in some sort of audit. If you're running certain tools against the database, you would see these pop up right away when they're granted to public. But now with the 11G security, they are, you would have to grant those to specific roles or different users, which we'll get into later with the transparent data encryption, but that is 11G security feature, and the transparent data encryption with the hardware is also able to use the transparent data encryption with the hardware security modules. You also have an option to use the wallet management and ways to protect the master key, and we'll get into that in a little bit. The encrypted data pump files are also available with 11G, which helps when you're moving data around and the data is at rest. And then auditing is on by default with 11G, and each of the auditing by session actually now creates its own record in the audit tables, and it is also on default, which for system privileges, which of course leads to larger auditing files and auditing tables. And in this presentation, I have ways to deal with those slides, because as much as it is important to be able to audit this stuff, filling up your database or system is not a good way to audit your database. So let's talk about the transparent data encryption. Encryption we had at a column data level in 10G, and with 11G, we were able to encrypt at a tablespace level. What's nice about these features is they really are application. They're not depending on the application. It's something that could be done behind the scenes without the application knowing. There are those packages. The DBMS crypto is a package that you can use if you wanted to still encrypt and use that functionality within your application to be able to hide information that way. Or if you're using virtual private databases, you can also encrypt data and then have rights through virtual private databases to execute a procedure or a function to decrypt that information. But completely transparent to the application, we have still options with column data as well as the tablespace level. What these really need is a wallet to hold the master encryption key, or depending if it's at the column level, a table encryption key, and it is also password protected. These types of encryption do help satisfy PCI, SOX, and HIPAA requirements. So for example, to do column encryption, basically you're creating a column, and after giving it the data type, you're telling it to encrypt and giving it the level of encryption that you want to use for this column. And here's a simple example of creating a customer table where we want to hide the account ID and possibly the credit card number. These are the different data types that are actually supported for the column encryption. So all of our normal ones with the characters and varchars, numbers, dates, even the national characters and varchars. And also new with 11G is the secure file and the LOB data. You can also use this with external tables, which again helps with data at rest. If you're having files that are out there, you're able to pull those in without exposing that data first into a column or a table, staging table that may not be encrypted. You can actually view that through an encrypted file. And this is, again, using data pump as the external table to pull in the data from the file. And you can encrypt, like, the Social Security number here, for example, and give it a password. Again, I've used very poor passwords as examples, but because these probably show up in the top 100 list of passwords to try when you're trying to log in or hack into a database. But again, it was more of just to give you an example, and I don't want to share any of my cryptic passwords that I use. So using these examples are probably the best way to show this. So in the transparent data encryption, we have a wallet, and that wallet information is actually stored in the SQLnet.aura, and that gives you the location and the directory of where that is. You basically set up the wallet by doing an alter system, set encryption key, and then identifying the password for that wallet. And then when you identify that wallet, you can open it by using the password. You would need to do this, so really you open up the database. It adds another step to opening up the database by actually having to open up the wallet as well and having a different password for that. And then you can validate in the database itself using dictionary tables, $, encryption _ wallet, that will tell you if that is actually open or not in the database. Once the wallet is open, anything that you look at in the database is now decrypted, but everything's still outside of the database in the data files if you're accessing that way and scraping through files, which again, not recommended as a database administrator, but you may have some malicious attempts at looking at data and scraping those, but any of that is that data in those files stays encrypted from that perspective. So really the only way to see the data when you're using the transparent data encryption is when you're logging in through either the application directly to the database and those methods to actually see that data. Another thing that you can do for column encryption is actually use salt and no salt options on the columns. And this is useful when you have a column that has very few distinct values. Like if you had sensitive information around your job titles or certain levels that they may have regarding a bonus structure or something like that. And so there were very few distinct values. When you encrypt those, you possibly could figure out a way to decrypt them if you have very few values to look at. So the no salt on the columns will actually, or the salt on the columns will actually randomly generate these values and put an additional security around them so the key is not figured out to be able to decrypt these columns. The disadvantages of salt is the indexes are not allowed on there, and you obviously have random values being generated, so that makes it very difficult to be able to join on those columns. With the no salt, which is really by default, indexes are also encrypted, and those values can have those indexes on there, and you can use those in your where clause. But the one thing that you can't do is not use like for these values, but you can do an equal join on them. What I have found really nice to use is actually the tablespace level encryption, because I create my wallet the same way, and I open it up to view the data. My data remains encrypted in an RMAN backup. It's also encrypted when I do exports, the data pump exports with tablespaces, and it stays transparent to the application. It's also, because the wallet opens up the decryption key to use this is not a lot of overhead when you're actually selecting from different tables, because it's opening it up, and then anytime you're not having to hit that a package or a function to decrypt each value as you're running your code, because it's already been opened up in the database and available in the database. Again, it's not for system tables, so don't use it on system or sysaux or undo. And these tables, you need to be careful of what you're storing there anyhow, and make sure that you're not having user tables in system or sysaux. The DBA table spaces will show an encrypted column, so you would be able to see that information. And then you also have, so you'll know which table spaces are actually encrypted. And then the $V encrypted table spaces provides you information which you can join against the DBA table spaces for more details. And to simply create a encrypted table space, you would actually do create table space and use the encryption parameter when you specify the storage clause. Simple enough. So now that I have my encrypted table space in the table, I may either choose to create new tables in it, depending on where I was in the application process. I can move my tables with an alter table move to a new table space. I have the create table as type of ability, and I can also use import or while remapping the table spaces to get the data information there. So let's take a quick look at auditing now that we have our data files secure on the back end and encrypted. One thing that we need to look at for auditing is some of the audit files. Obviously, with it being turned on by default, it makes it useful to know that these events for log on and log off, as well as all the system privileges type events, are logged. But where are they really found? So the audit trail is equal to DB. If you use the database creation assistant, if you're upgrading in place, some of these parameters you will have to change and start to use the 11G new features. But if you're creating a new database and importing data in as part of your upgrade process, if you use that configuration assistant, these are what's set by default. And the audit file destination is where all your audit dump files are. So what is audited by default? There's a huge list that is on this slide that gives you an idea of what is actually audited. Alter system, create session, dropping users, creating any table, those types of privileges that you can really get in and either change objects or really being able to view any information from the database are audited by default. So these would show up in the audit tables and the audit logs. The user access and failed logons, you can actually audit the session whenever not successful. These are things where you can run queries against the database and actually change those just so you're not getting log on and log off. But you actually want to know when there might be someone that is constantly trying to log on with different passwords and hack into the database. That not successful might be all you really need to audit. You also have select user ID from the audit table where return code is 1017, which gives you where that's not successful. So you can select from these audit tables to view that information. To enable the data definition language changes, you enable that parameter to be true, and then that will audit all the DDL changes for you. Again, we talked about the by session and by access will actually create each a record for all these files, which means we have to manage carefully our audit logs and our database size based on these tables. So again, it's very important to look at the overall security of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish with the audit logs. What are they being used for? Are they part of a compliance regulation that you need to keep logs for a certain period of time? Are you letting either the security admins or people that are defining some of the enterprise level type of security know what type of retention policy you need to have for these logs? Oracle actually provides a whole another option with the Audit Vault, not to be confused with the Database Vault. The Audit Vault actually helps manage the whole audit trail, audit records, also protects that from being written by the DBAs. So that is an option out there available. But again, it's also defining what type of security requirements are needed based on the database itself, the sensitivity of the information, the compliance and regulations that it falls under. So you need to understand those first before you can start to manage the size of these logs and these tables, because purging them is not going to help you if each quarter you need to run a report on the audit database and you only have the last 10 days. So make sure you understand those, make sure that's communicated and validated. But to be able to monitor, it's important to monitor the space in the database and also communicate those needs that you will have based on those retention policies. Main thing that I highly recommend you do is obviously move the audit table out of system. This ends up giving you a couple of things that you can do. You can actually then move it to an encrypted tablespace if you wanted to, and also you're not going to blow up your system tablespace real huge based on your auditing requirements. So moving that from system, you actually have to use the DBMS audit management package and move that to a different location. Of course, me moving it in this example to SysOx is not going to help you with encrypted table spaces, but you can move it to a different table space that you're able to audit and have that table space audited. It's not done with a regular alter table move type of command because of the whole auditing process. Needs to be able to use the DBMS audit management package. And then when you select from DBA tables, you will see that that table space has moved to a different table space. So along with the moving of that table, the audit table, you can use the DBMS audit management package to set up jobs to clean up some of the audit trail and keep different information purge as needed to make sure that it's a maintainable size or you're following your regulations and compliance rules. So the cleanup will actually here, the default cleanup interval, this is actually hour interval. So it's showing that you want to start up this job for every 24 hours to clean up the audit trail. You can create a purge job that actually runs Again, this is based on an hourly thing. So this is the audit trail purge is every 10 days. In this example, and again, it's very important to understand what your retention policies are. You have audit $ and FGA logs that are used. You need to manage those using the DBMS audit management package, and you cannot manually update and delete and change these audit tables like you normally would, because it's definitely needed for the rest of the audit process within the database. That's why it's important to use these packages. And you have different parameters that you can look at. So the DBM audit management config parameters, which will show you the different parameters that are set up for auditing. You have the last purge of the audit trail, and you can look at what jobs you currently have configured, as well as the events and history of the purges that you've done against the audit table. So auditing is important for compliance reasons and capturing this information. You obviously, with the system privileges turned on and some of the DDL, it is a very valuable tool in knowing what has changed on the database and managing those types of changes and being able to have a place to go look for those. But make sure you understand the desired retention and turn on the purging as needed for that, or be communicating how much space you're actually going to need for auditing. So Oracle CPUs, critical patch updates, we'll cover here quickly and talk about that, because this is also a very important part of a secure configuration, and understanding that Oracle produces critical patches once a quarter. They send out release notes that have a ton of information about the different vulnerabilities or the level that might be affected, providing information about how many what areas of the database might be affected, places to patch. Again, in installing Oracle databases, you definitely want to install the components that you need and are going to use, because when it comes to critical patch updates or patch set updates, you may or may not fall in a higher risk category based on what you've actually installed. So the patch set, the PSU, is what was introduced, I think, about 1.5 years ago. Might be a little longer now, but it actually includes some critical bug fixes that apply to most customers, and it also contains all the security patches. This set of patches also goes through the same regression testing that the CPU does. The main difference between the critical patch update and the patch set update is the critical bug fixes that come along with the PSU. You really need to choose one direction to go, because if you start applying the PSUs, you cannot go back to the critical patch updates based on the patching way that these both patch in the environment. So if you're going to just do critical patch updates to grab all the security patches, stay down that path, or if you wanted to take the opportunity along with your policy to implement your security patches and grab those critical bug fixes, you can do that through the PSU. So this was also very, very interesting in some of the security surveys that we've taken, that CPUs or the critical patch updates are not always being applied. And really, depending on your environment, downtime, resource time, having higher priorities, and there may be several other excuses of why these aren't applied. But setting up a policy and procedure to get these as part of your secure configuration in the database are very important. And you know it's a quarterly process that happens, whether you're doing it every half a year or looking at it every quarter. And it's a repeatable process where you have the documentation that comes, and you can grab information about what might be different very easily and quickly, having procedures to run checks against the database of what version you're on, or even to be able to do a pre- and postscript type of query against the database to make sure that you have it applied appropriately. And you can also review the risk assessment and have test plans. I know for SOX compliance that you are definitely having to at least stay up current on security patches and provide information about what you're applying, and have a set of test plans that you're using to check and validate that that patch has been applied. The nice thing about these patches is the set of security patches and the regression testing that Oracle is already doing provides at least some confidence that you can go through and apply certain patches with at least a good test plan in your environment to validate real quickly that these patches have been applied. Real quick on the January 2012, there was an additional script that was added to this to check on the SEN. There was some information released on growth of the SEN, and so scripts like this that come out in the CPU and PSU information, I end up taking and implementing different checks against the database on a regular basis so I can monitor those and manage those. And with these types of things, I can flag if there's a different result that comes out of it. And this check actually provides real quick information about the SEN growth of my database and make sure I'm in a good place, or it provides different recommendations on what I need to do to fix it. So those are things that I can capture and put in an automated script, whether I'm either putting it in the scheduler in the database or using just a regular job scheduler to run SQL. I can start to add some of these types of pre- and post checks from the security patches to ensure that my databases have proper health checks. In setting up a test plan, obviously you're looking at some of the areas that the applications are heavily hitting. In doing that, if you're able to adjust your test plan, you want to maybe look at the different components that this critical patch might be hitting this time around, or have a regular standard test plan that you're always going through some of the same steps. And if there's new things that come out to check in the documentation, that you start adding those to your test plans. So to sum it up, I hope you were able to learn a little bit about some of the 11G security features, some ways to obviously keep your databases in a secure configuration, and the different information to get those table spaces and data at rest encrypted. And even as we're providing good auditing of tables and different activity against the database, that we're also looking at purging and archiving some of those logs. And a quick flyby of the critical patch updates. So I'm going to pull back James and see if there's any questions that we might have. I know I took too much time. Like I said, I could talk all day about security if you let me.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you. And yes, there are a number of questions that people have been asking throughout the presentation, which is great. So I'm going to start asking those questions now. For everybody else, I hope you've enjoyed the session. I certainly have, and please hang around for the Q&A. You're sure to learn some more as Michelle tackles these questions. And if you have some questions yourself, either based on the presentation, but also on Oracle security in general, please put these in the question box. I'm sure Michelle will be happy to answer them. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions here. I'm going to start off with a few which seem to be kind of more general and probably recaps on the presentation content. So the first one from Saeed Sharif Ahmed. Thank you, Saeed. It's are XDB Web Services packages?
They are packages as well as different tables that are out there and available in the database to actually run web services from the database. They're part of the XMLDB, and those are basically, if you look up XDB Web Services, those will have the list of packages as well as tables that are all involved.
Thank you, Mel. Said also has a couple of other questions here, so I'm just going to fire these across to you. So I'd also like to know a little bit more about ABC secure files. So if you've just got a few more points that you can expand on the ABC secure file, please.
Okay, so secure file might be a whole other presentation on its own. But along with some of the ASM features and having able to use that to manage actually file systems, as well as some of the life cycle of data in the database, the secure files are another way to store CLOBs and different data types, as well as files that the database can access outside of the database. And those have a whole different implementation. Might be something we're filing, might be something that we might want to consider writing a paper or having a follow-up webcast on, because there's a lot more detail than that.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
What do you think, James?
Yeah, I'm sure when we come to the end of the Q&A, there'll be some contact details. So maybe you could post on Twitter some way to find out a little bit more information about secure files.
Absolutely.
Maybe some of these things here. I'm sure there's lots of reference points, particularly on the Oracle Technology Network. So I'd also like to know what is PSU and how frequent are they released?
Okay, so the PSU is the patch set updates, and they are released in the same cycle as the critical patch updates. It's really the exact same process that Oracle goes through, and the real difference is just having that additional critical bugs that may affect a broader base of customers in the Oracle database. So those are really the only two paths to either do security patching. So they both contain all the security patches, but the PSU is a patch set update, which may require a little bit more testing from your side, but it does include some of those additional bug fixes.
Thanks, Michelle. Got a question from Redgate Batnagar. I hope I pronounced that correctly, and he's also asking about the PSU and CPU. He would like to know how to check whether PSU and CPU needs to bring down the database, if that makes sense.
Yes. So in a rack or cluster type of environment, both of these normally provide rolling patches, so you can roll those without having to bring down the database. There is a section in the README documentation of the patch set release that contains whether it can be applied as a live patch or whether it needs to bring down the databases. Most of them being security patches do provide the rolling patches, especially for the cluster environment. Obviously, if you're doing an instance level by itself, standalone, the CPUs and PSUs require downtime.
Thanks, Michelle. A question here from RK Valuvali, and he's asking, is column level encryption applicable for virtual columns as well?
That is an excellent question, and I do not know the answer to that. So I'm going to have to find out and get back to you. I have not tried it on a virtual column.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. I'll be putting up a video for this webinar and also a transcript of it on All Things Oracle. So maybe that's something I'll be including the Q&A. So maybe that's something you can put on.
I can definitely follow up. Yeah.
Comments on there. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, we've got a question here regarding what is SLAT in the database. This is a general question, I think, from the beginning of the webinar.
I'm sorry, what was?
So SLAT, SALT.
SALT? So SALT is a way to basically, I think of as spicing up the encryption, right? Because adding SALT will give you random encryption values instead of the regular encryption values for those columns that may be all, maybe 5, 10 different values that you have. And adding SALT to the columns will basically give you more random generated type of encryption. So instead of seeing 10 different encrypted values, you will see a lot more than that. So however many records are in your table, because it'll add some randomness to the encryption. Instead of encrypting all the ones as that and all the twos as another encryption. So it's a way to mask even more what the values are in there.
Thanks, Michelle. So a question again from Redgate. Thank you again for this question. He's asking about SEM Health Check.SQL and what is it and what are the benefits of using it?
Okay, so the SEM Health Check came out with this last patch set because the patch set actually provided some additional fixes around an elevated SCN growth. So the SCN is the system change number of the database. So anytime you put changes in there, you have system change numbers being generated. And in very few cases with very database-linked environments, they've seen environments for the SCN grow very rapidly. And it does have a limit, very, very large limit in the Oracle database. And so this SEM Health Check does a real quick check on your environments to make sure that you are nowhere close to this limit for hitting the SENs. Provides you a status if you are good and fine and clear. And then when you apply the critical patch set, that also provides a fix to the issue of the elevated SEN growth. So this is something that you can check against databases to make sure that you're not in danger of hitting the SEN limit of the Oracle databases. And again, it's another quick monitoring thing that I pull from the different critical patch updates to use and apply when I'm just doing regular health checks against my database. But it's provided by Oracle in the patch set, if I didn't make that clear. Sorry.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. Next question is from Don Jarman. Thank you, Don. And he's just asking some recommendations on automated assessments.
Recommendations on automated assessments?
That's correct, yes.
That's the question?
Yeah. Would you like Don to expand on that a little bit?
Yes. I'm thinking some of it might be different queries you would run against the assessments of who has what privileges. So you can possibly, and if I'm going down the wrong track, maybe you can respond to that. But automating some queries to either grab information about DBA roles, DBA privileges, to do a quick assessment of who has these rights and throwing these up in reports. You can also automate queries to run against the audit tables to provide those types of information, whether you're throwing these into some sort of shell scripting or into a package where you're producing information that's used for auditing. You can schedule these types of queries and execute packages through DBMS scheduler to automate them and grab the information. And then again, the audit tables that you can query against. So some of those, I think, are the main ones that I know auditors want to look for: who has system type privileges, who is getting access to these different roles, and what are they doing with these roles. So any of the DDL type of changes that might be going on are definitely high on my list to audit.
That's answered your question, Don. If not, please clarify a few points in the question panel. Next question by Mohammed Mamoni. Thank you, Mohammed. So Mohammed has a user in Oracle PeopleSoft that he locks it several times a week. Is there a way in Oracle? Sorry, I just need to read this question. Okay, so Mohammed's asking about users in PeopleSoft, and is there a way for Oracle to add responsibilities as it's locked several times a week?
So the account is locked several times a week?
That's correct, yes.
And so the locking of the account actually comes from the default profile or maybe another profile that's been created. So depending on the user, you can check the profile that is associated with that user in DBMS or DBA users. You can, if it's a default profile, you can actually change the settings of how many retries they have or whether the account is locked or it's unlimited retries, which I don't recommend the unlimited retries. But you can change that value of the retry values for that user or create a new profile that has maybe different settings for a group of users that you want to allow them more times to try. It's basically failed login attempts is the parameter in the profile that you would need to set.
Fantastic, thank you, Michelle. I think you understood it better than me, so that's great. Next question is again from Redgate, thank you. This follows on from checking whether the patch updates and critical patch updates need to be brought down, and would they need to be applied on all nodes in a RAC?
So in a RAC environment, yes, they would be applied, and this is where you can do the rolling patches. In each of the release notes and README files for the quarterly releases, it gives specific directions on RAC, applying the patch to a RAC cluster, and it would propagate that to all the nodes in the cluster.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. There's a few general questions here about the recording of the webinar. I know a couple of people have joined in late. So whilst I just wait for anybody else to ask some questions, please, this is obviously a great opportunity to ask Michelle questions on security for Oracle and particularly Oracle 11G. This webinar has been recorded and the full recording will be available after this presentation. You can find out details on the website, but as you've registered for this session, I will send you details by email when it's available. So I have a question in from Sunita Matthew. Thank you, Sunita. She has to periodically refresh her test dev environment from production data for development and testing, and she'd like to prevent developers from viewing sensitive data. What security method would you recommend?
Well, there's a couple that are pretty much easy to do. One is almost have the exact same permissions in production as you would in dev environments, and that would give them specific rights to see different things. The other thing is if obviously if they have a lot of rights in production, but there is different data masking tools, or you can write your own to encrypt data as you're moving it over to the test environment. Oracle provides the data masking. I know a couple other companies that also provide some data masking tools to be able to hide data in the development environments. You can also set up virtual private databases in the test environment where they only see specific rows of data that might be able to lock those down a little bit more, or you can also write some of your own procedures to mask some of that data. But the masking tools that are out there are at least worth considering if you do it constantly, have very sensitive information that developers shouldn't get at, to take a look at some of those tools.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, I'm going to take the screen back and put the contact details for both Michelle and myself on the screen. But if you do have any final questions, please do put them into the question box now, and hopefully Michelle can answer them before we round things up for today. Okay, so you can contact both Michelle and I either by email, so we've got our email addresses on the screen in front of you now. We're also both on Twitter, so please do follow us after this session. And we're also both on LinkedIn as well, and you can see our public LinkedIn profiles there. Again, please feel free to connect with us. It would be great to connect with you on LinkedIn, and hopefully you'll find what we're talking about on Twitter interesting. You can also put some questions to us via Twitter or email, again via LinkedIn. Okay, so just brought the question panel out again. There are no new questions, so please jot the contact details down. You'll also be able to see these in the recording of the webinar as well, which will be made available to you. I'm running webinars every 2 to 3 weeks at the moment. They're all based on Oracle technologies. It's going to be a mixture of webinars for developers and for DBAs. So please check out the webinars on the Redgate website, what's available. Our next webinar is an exciting one by another Oracle Ace director, by Dan Hotker, and he'll be looking at the new features for developers in Oracle 11G R2. So there's probably quite a big DBA audience for today's webinar, but I'm sure there's going to be some interesting parts in that webinar, maybe that you didn't know, or what your development team can and will be doing with Oracle 11G R2, and follow obviously quite nicely from Saeed's last webinar, which was on upgrading to 11G R2. You can register for this webinar and get access to all the past webinars, the video recordings of them, on the Redgate website. Quite a long URL here. I'm trying to get that shortened at the moment, but for the moment you'll need to go to product/Oracle Development /Deployment Suite for Oracle /webinars, or you can navigate through our navigation. We're quite hot on UX, so hopefully it'll be very easy for you to find. If it's not, please drop me a line, and I'm sure the UX team will be very interested to hear. Okay, so thank you once again, Michelle, for presenting this session, and thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope it's been useful for you. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I look forward to you joining us for the next session on the 13th of March. So thank you, and I hope everybody has a nice day.